1 week season.
What is going on, OWS fam, DFS fam, YouTube fam? Welcome to the week 3 edition of the OWS Angles podcast. I am your host, I am your guest, I am JMToWin. As always, throw this baby on 1.5x speed or 2x speed, and let's get started with a really fun, unique little week here. Not a lot of high total games, not a lot of games with shootout potential, one game with clear shootout potential, but some clear opportunities to the downside. 5 backup quarterbacks starting, 26 teams playing. So a lot of fun stuff to get to this week. So we are going to kind of take an overview look at what I'm seeing on this week's slate and what makes this slate unique, on how I will be looking to organize the games available on this slate, and then how I will be looking to handle those games on this particular slate. As always, we're looking to avoid redundancies. So if you are an OWS subscriber, this will be some different angles, some different content than you're getting from me in my journal, in Discord, in my player grid, in the scroll, and a little bit different, obviously, from my Friday night and Saturday night updates as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. Before we get to this slate, we talked in the Week 1 Angles podcast about how I would recommend using my player grid. And so if you're curious about that, you can go back and listen to that. I think that was how I led off that podcast and spent a lot of time on that podcast. So obviously we were talking about Week 1 that week, but also we were talking about how I would recommend using my player grid and pulling that information into your own player pool. So sort of building off of that, I wanted to read a cool email that came in. We had a bunch of big wins from the OWS community in Week 2, same as Week 1, hopefully same as Week 3. We'll just keep this rolling. But a really cool email came in this week, and the user said, after about 10 years of grinding NFL DFS, I finally broke through yesterday. And with the help of OWS content, took down the $100 SPY, as well as the $200 single entry, $50 single entry, $12 single entry, $5 single entry, and grabbed a King of the Desert ticket on a $5 entry also, all yielding a final result of turning $400 into $190,000. I've been an OWS subscriber since the site launched in 2018 and have been following JM's content since the Roto Grinders days before that. And despite trying different subscription sites over the years, I've come to the conclusion for a while now that OWS is the only content I want or need. I don't use projections, I don't use optimizers, just the articles. Needless to say, I'm extremely thankful this is the week it all came together. Nearly everything from my lineup was pulled from the scroll this week. Mike specifically called out Fannin plus Juwan Johnson, as well as CMC plus the Saints defense. JM and Pappy both liked Lions stacks with an Adunze bringback. And honestly, no one mentioning Amon-Ra St. Brown was even also helpful, because that's how I knew his ownership would be super low. And so what I want to, they wrapped up, I guess, read this part saying, I want to say thank you for all of your hard work, not to be hyperbolic, but it can really deliver life-changing results for people, and that's a really cool thing. So what I thought was so cool about this was when we launched the site, if you've been with the site since the beginning, it was just me providing content, and it was a low price tag, and I was running premium content at Roto Grinders and had my content over there, and there were enough people who my content was integral to their process that my thought was I can build out OWS as sort of a supplementary subscription, something that if people just want my content, my thoughts, they can come over and pay a small price and get that. And then over a handful of years, OWS grew into a full-fledged DFS site. But one of the things I never liked about being the only content provider was that it felt harder for me to take a stand on what I wanted to do that week, because it felt more critical to provide people with an understanding of all the options on a particular site, which actually probably made my content less valuable. So as the site has been built out, that has allowed me to focus more on what I'm seeing on a particular slate. But then we also have other tremendous content providers and tremendous DFS players who are providing their own content of what they are seeing on a slate. And so this approach of taking a couple things that stood out to him from Mike's content, a couple things that stood out from mine and Pappy's content, the fact that I mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown several times last week, I had a little bit of exposure to him, but I kept talking about how on paper he was not the best play from this spot. And that being able to pull that in as a user and say, hey, there's really not a lot of excitement or faith in Amon-Ra St. Brown here, which means that if he hits, he's that much more valuable. And sort of pulling all this in together really helped him create this powerful roster. And so 2 things to highlight. One, again, there's this journey in DFS where for this guy, it's 10 years playing DFS, and then $400 this weekend turns into 190K, right? We say 1 week season because we should treat each week like it's its own season. We should treat it with that level of focus and attention to detail and all that. And then also there's kind of 2 meanings here. The other being, it really just takes 1 week to make your whole season or even several years of your DFS play. So if you're playing $400 a weekend across 18 weekends, across 10 years, and you never hit a single time across that entire stretch of time, you would still be out way ahead. And obviously you have some small wins along the way or some weeks where you get some of that money back. And so you just see how you keep grinding and putting these things together. We are playing a game of asymmetric payouts. So if you're playing fewer entries, if you're playing primarily single entry, it can go several years, right? I've talked in when I used to play MLB DFS, and so you get a chance to play every single day, every single slate. And it wasn't unusual for me to go a month without having a really good slate. And you put that in the context of the NFL, well, that's a couple years without having a really good slate. There were a couple times where I went 2 whole months without having a really good slate, or a month and a half without having a really good slate. So that's 2-3 seasons of NFL if you're playing single entry 3 max. And so obviously we can expand our sample size by doing MME or by putting more than 1 roster into our single entry 3 max play. But if you're just doing 1 entry, it can take a while for this edge to pay off, but recognize you can kind of, what I always say is like, look around at the OWS community, look at the Bink's channel on Sunday nights, probably 14 out of 18 weeks, 15 out of 18 weeks, that Bink's channel is going to have several people posting big wins. And so what you see is the people in the community are hitting what we are driving home, not just in terms of player pools, but in terms of how to think about DFS, how to attack DFS. It works, right? And so if it's not working for you on that week, that's okay, because we're talking about building up a sample size and continuing to attack with plus EV play that will pay off over time. Now, if you're playing MME, you probably see that. We saw JD Atlas last week in the slant. He had several rosters in the top 10. One of our users had the OWS logo peppering the top of the leaderboards, like several rosters in the top 20, several rosters in the top 100. We had 19 of the top 90 spots in the slant, the mass multi-entry 150 max slant on DraftKings. I think it was 19 of the top 100 or top 90 entries were OWS users from 5 different users. So, if you're playing MME, you have that chance for that sample size to play out in your favor more quickly. But even if you're doing single entry 3 max, if you keep putting in good rosters and playing proper strategy and thinking through DFS, it's going to come together, right? You can look around the OWS community and see it's working, but we're playing for asymmetric payouts across larger sample sizes. So you're just going to keep banging on that door and it comes. And so, really cool to read that. And just wanted to also highlight, again, this idea, this concept of using the scroll to not say, who does JM like, or who does Mike like, who does Hilo like, but to say, who are different people talking about and what resonates with me and what can I pull together for a roster that makes sense to me. So really cool. Wanted to start there. And with that, let's get to this slate. So I asked my 4-year-old daughter this morning what makes this week unique. And after I clarified for her what unique means, she said, well, don't ask me because I don't know. So that's fair. So I decided to dig in myself and sort through and organize what we are looking at here. So 13 games, that's kind of, I think, the first thing to highlight is as we get into bye weeks, and then, we will get into the international games. We had the double Monday night game. We had the Friday night game in week 1. So we've had 12 game main slates. 13 game main slates are actually pretty rare at this point, because even when there are no teams on bye, you have the international games, you have the extra games on deeper into the season, games on Saturdays, and you got the occasional Friday night game or double Monday night game. So this is as big as it gets, and we don't see many of these anymore. And then once we get to bye weeks, we're gonna have these 9-10 game slates pretty often, right? So 13 game, pretty big slate. So we can have a tendency to try to spread too thin on slates like this, to try to cover everything. And so there's 2 sides to this. If you're playing mass multi-entry in particular, you do want to think about who could be a difference-making player on the slate. So in this game environment, can this player bury me? So there's certain players who the answer is always yes. You could always say, Puka Nacua could always bury you. Jamar Chase could always bury you. But am I truly concerned about missing out on that on this particular week, in this game environment, in this matchup? And so we can look at things on that deeper level of like, who can we cut out of our player pool? And a lot of times, the players who can hit any time, but we say, but this is just not the sharpest spot for them, we can cut them out of our player pool. So in an ideal world, you would go a whole season and not miss playing. If you played MME, you would go a whole season and not miss a single blow up game, like a single huge game that is on all the rosters at the tops of the leaderboards, right? So, oh man, this guy was only 4% owned and he put up 35 points and he was only 6K in salary. And the 4% of rosters that had this guy are all in competition for first place now. Well, in an ideal world, you have exposure to that guy. And every single week, whoever that guy is, or if there is one of those guys, you have exposure to that guy, while also not bleeding out a ton of rosters, just chasing after guys who could do this, and never hitting on them. So it won't ever happen exactly like that. You are going to have some players that have those blow-up games that you missed out on. But we should be able to say after the fact why we missed out on that guy. What I mean by that is we should be considering all of these players, and then when they don't hit, we say, okay, well, the reason why I didn't have them was this. Not, oh, I didn't even think about that guy. It should be, I thought about that guy, I took him out of my player pool. And that should be the case for every player. And then we can think through like, okay, what's the game environment he would need? How likely is it that it happens here? Do I want 3% or 4% of them? And then you start looking at your pool and saying, okay, I've got 3% or 4% of a ton of guys, which shows you're just kind of scared of missing out on what might end up happening. And so you got to tighten that up a little bit, right? So that's how we kind of look at things, is finding that balance between making sure, ideally, that we give ourselves those opportunities to hit those big games while also not just bleeding out a ton, and being really smart and careful and honest with ourselves about what story would need to happen in this game in order for this guy to hit. And if that happens, is there something else that's benefiting in this game? Should I build my roster a particular way where I have this guy? On the flip side of this, you can't fear failure. And that means, so I've talked about this in the past, and I've said, when you pay too close attention to the numbers and you're not willing enough to just say, hey, this game could go this way, right? So for example, this week, I can't point on paper to how Colts and Titans becomes a shootout, but I can step back, I can zoom out and say, between these two divisional opponents, a Colts offense that's been playing well. So let's throw this in here. The Titans defense is actually pretty good. A Colts offense that's been playing well. A Titans defense that's pretty good. A Titans offense that has been called really conservatively by Callahan, but Cam Ward is playing really aggressively. And so you start realizing, okay, there's a scenario here where an 0-2 Titans team that has been close in both their games. They were ahead of the Rams at halftime, even though they ended up losing by whatever it was, 14 or something like that. They were ahead at halftime. They were kind of in control of that game early in the second half, and then it got away from them. And so this Titans team, that it's not like they've been getting blown out, right? They played the Broncos close. They played the Rams close for most of that game. And they're trying to take steps, and they would love to win this game against the Colts, kind of make a statement. Colts are 2-0, and they're trying to keep that going. And so in an important divisional game where the Texans and Jags are also playing, right? The Jags win that game, they're 2-1, and the Colts don't want to fall to 2-1 here. So, yeah, we could see the Colts doing well on offense, the Titans having to get aggressive on offense in response. And all of a sudden, this game sort of snowballs to where instead of field goals, it's becoming touchdowns. And instead of something like 21-17 or 21-18, all of a sudden you have a 31-28 game, right? And so we can paint the picture of how these games could shoot out, but we can't break down the numbers, right? If we break down the numbers, we're going to come to the same conclusion we're getting from the Vegas lines, which is, this is probably going to be moderately low scoring, somewhere in that low 40s range of total points. And there's probably nothing that really emerges from this as a result. So we can't get so fine with trying to control things based on the numbers that we are never being willing to step outside of that and use our imagination to say, what could happen? Where could I win a tournament? So I heard this recently, I forget who he was doing an interview with, but heard Tom Brady say this recently, and he was talking about quarterbacks, but he said, you can't fear failure, because when you fear failure, you try to control it. And that basically summed up what I've been trying to say about DFS play for so long, is when you are afraid of failing, when you're afraid of stepping outside of the comfort of what the numbers are telling you, and you're afraid to step outside of that and use your imagination on what could happen, well, then you start trying to just control things too much. And then the games start, and we see this every year in week one. We come off the Thursday night game in week one, and it always plays out in certain aspects very differently than everyone expected. And then we turn the page to the Friday night game, and that one plays out very differently than everyone expected. And by the time we get to Sunday and everyone's building their first rosters of the season, they are still building as if everything is going to play out exactly the way everyone is expecting. It's so hard for us to get that out of our brains heading into the weekend. We know that on Sunday night, there are going to be things that play out differently than everyone was expecting. So the more that we can step out of that fear of failure, the more we can step away from trying to control everything and play things exactly by the numbers, the more we can, again, putting it in quarterback terms, kind of see a tight window throw for a big play downfield and take the shot, right? And maybe we don't hit it, but we have to have that willingness to go for the big play, to go for the win in tournaments. And so, yeah, on a week like this, I think with so many teams in play, it's going to be important to not spread yourself too thin and to be able to see the places where you can say, yeah, I want to use my imagination and have some places that other people are not on where a shootout could happen where people don't see it coming. One of the biggest weekends for DFS, for OWS, some of our OWS members was week 2 of the 2022 season, where the Dolphins and Ravens had whatever it was, a 42-38 game, something like that. And OWS wasn't even on that game that week, but there were mentions throughout the week where we always talk about how do shootouts happen? Shootouts happen from explosive players hitting for big plays. And in that particular game, or that particular week, I said, I'm not on this game, but the Dolphins do have Tyreek Hill, they have Jalen Waddle. The Ravens have, I think they had Zay Flowers at the time. They have Lamar Jackson. They have whoever else they had on that roster. And it was like there's a lot of explosive players in this game. That was where I left it, right? The over-under in that game was like 41.5, something like that. All the numbers told you don't play this game, but there were a handful of users from OWS who, from years of hearing us talk about how to win in DFS, they were like, well, there are explosive players in this game. JM just highlighted that, and now everybody's moving on from this one. Everyone's moving on from it, which means it's going to be low owned. What if it plays to the upside? Well, if it plays to the upside, it can play all the way to the upside. So let's stack up this game. And it was one of those weeks where we saw OWS pennants in first place in almost every tournament because there were enough OWS users, not even from us highlighting that game, but just from the things we've talked about over the years who were like, okay, but if we're saying there are explosive players in this game and nobody's on it, it's got the low total, let's just go in on this game, right? And so we end up taking down all those first place finishes from the community across a week like that. And so it's that thinking of, where can I get creative? Where can I see something that people are not seeing, that the numbers don't point to, and let me take my shot, right? So we don't want to spread ourselves too thin, but we also do want to be willing to say, where are some spots where things could go differently this week? Because if there's just one game that really looks like it could shoot out, and that one game doesn't shoot out, that leaves things wide open. If one other game shoots out and it's a game nobody's on, you're going to be way ahead of the field in that situation. So looking a little bit more deeply at what's on this slate. So again, 26 teams, 13 games, 26 teams, 9 teams have implied point totals of 24 to 25.5. So a pretty tight range here of these teams where none of them are really separating from the pack, but there are 9 teams, which is a pretty decent number out of 26, with this 24 to 25.5. There's also some teams in the 23 point range, and it kind of pushes up close to this territory, but organizing these teams of 24 plus implied points. So we have 4 teams, the Packers, the Bucks, the Falcons, and the Seahawks, who are favored by 5.5 or more points. So again, these are teams that the question is, can they be pushed? Can the Saints push the Packers? The Saints are playing Seahawks. Can the Browns push the Packers to get aggressive in this game? We know that the Packers like to run the ball, have a low volume passing attack that takes downfield shots. So what we would really love is for the volume to pile up a little bit for the Packers. Is there opportunity for the Browns to push this game? Do we want to build for a scenario in which the Packers are forced to be a little bit more aggressive? Because we know they're not typically aggressive when they don't have to be. They're looking to win games, and if they can control the game from in front, that's what they're going to do. Bucks and Jets. This is actually an interesting one because the Jets, we've talked about this already this season, the Bucks are one of these rare teams that does not require the opponent to be scoring points in order for them to score a bunch of points. The Bucks are willing to be aggressive and score a bunch of points. 5 of Baker Mayfield's tournament winning scores, 5 of his 6 tournament winning scores last year came in games where the Bucks dominated. They were not back and forth games, which you typically need, right? We talked last week about where Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow got their tournament winners last year, the year before, where they always get their tournament winners, is being pushed by the opponent, a game where they have to be aggressive throughout the entire game in order to win a close, higher scoring game. And so you need to tell a story of that game being close and higher scoring. The Bucks, you don't typically need that. But also, we talked recently about football. There being kind of 2 games we're playing. There's the game on the scoreboard, and then there's the battle of wills. And so there's a component from the Bucks, this big physical team that is trying to impose their will on opponents, that are they as likely to do that against a non-conference opponent, right? Aren't they likelier to kind of keep their foot on the opponent's neck, so to speak, when they have it there in a divisional game, in a game against a conference opponent who's one of the other top teams in the conference? And so with Tyrod Taylor here against a Jets team from the other conference, with all the injuries, 3 out of 5 starters injured on the Bucks offensive line, expected to miss this week, is this a spot where we see the Bucks really keep the throttle down, or if they have control of this game, do they just say, all right, let's keep control of this game and win in that way? Then we have let's go to the Seahawks and the Saints. We have the Seahawks and the Saints in this game where the Saints have played really well, like really well. The Saints were end of game drive away from tying things up against the Cardinals. They were an end of game drive away from taking that game away from the 49ers. They haven't been able to pull it off in either spot. They're also, what we love, they're playing hurry up offense, a lot of no huddle, a lot of throws, a lot of short area throws, but they are focusing on the passing attack. They're focusing on playing fast. So the one thing that gives me pause here, well, I guess a couple of things. Seahawks have a great defense, right? Not a great matchup for the Saints in this spot. But a lot of the things that the Seahawks do in terms of trying to confuse the quarterback, throw a lot of looks at him, is a lot of what Spencer Rattler's already dealt with the Cardinals. And then he played another good defense in the 49ers, very different defense stylistically, but another defense in the 49ers that was good. And he's played well in both these games. So what really gives me pause here is we moved from the Superdome, which is a really great place for a young quarterback in a new system to be running a no huddle, hurry up, kind of aggressive style of offense, over to Seattle, where it's going to be really loud, really difficult to hear, really difficult to communicate. So that's the one thing that gives me pause here. I do think that the Saints have potential to kind of keep this game close, but more than likely, the Seahawks are playing from in front, and that's how this game plays out. And then we have got the Falcons and the Panthers. And this is an interesting one because the Panthers have not looked good this year. In fact, the only time they've looked good was when the Cardinals went into like 2 quarters of basically prevent mode, where it was like, hey, we're just going to play zone. We're not going to throw anything at the quarterback. We're going to let them march the field, have underneath throws, and just wait for them to make a mistake. And they kind of figured, hey, if they have to go on long drives, eventually they're going to make a mistake or they're going to run out of time. And it almost worked. Then the Cardinals get an onside kick, and the Panthers get an onside kick, and the Cardinals are like, oh gosh, we have to actually play defense again. And now all of a sudden the Panthers, who couldn't get stopped for a quarter and a half, they've got the ball, try to drive for a game-winning touchdown, and the Cardinals start throwing a real defense at them again and stop them right away, right? So the Panthers have looked awful outside of this stretch of time when the Cardinals kind of were like, all right, this game's over, let's just run out the clock. But we've seen this Panthers offense turn things around at points in their seasons. We've seen last year under Dave Canales, Bryce Young come back and turn things around. We've seen Bryce Young take Michael Penix and the Falcons to, I forget what the score was in that game last year. I think it was 36-30, something like that. High-scoring game where the Panthers actually won, and the Falcons Falcons needed to win it to make the playoffs. They also needed the Bucs to lose, which they didn't get that help, but I don't think they got that help. But basically knocked the Falcons out of the playoffs, and again, the Falcons needed to win. And so it is possible that the Panthers kind of turn the page and do well here. And so I think that's an interesting one to think about. Then we have the Eagles and Chargers, both implied to score 24-plus points in tighter games that are expected to be moderate scoring. So in a game like Eagles-Rams, Chargers-Broncos, you have kind of the situation where the offenses are good enough that they can score points no matter how good the defense is. So yes, the defenses are really good on both these teams. The offenses are really good on both these teams, right? So you don't expect either team to be below 20 points. You also don't expect either team to get up into the 30-point range, right? And so one of these games where you've got kind of higher priced pieces, especially on the Eagles, on the Rams, less so on the Chargers and Broncos, but some higher priced pieces and a lower likelihood of a shootout. But there are ways that you could tell a story of those games where the offenses outperform the defenses. I never want to load up on a bad offense because they're playing a bad defense. That's rarely a recipe for tournament wins. But loading up on a good offense playing against a good defense can pay off. A good offense can get the upper hand against a good defense and win one of those games. So it's going to be, a lot of contested catches and a lot of tight window throws. But if the offense is clicking, they're able to make those catches, they're able to make those throws, then all of a sudden those drives stay alive and turn into touchdowns instead of punts or touchdowns instead of field goals. So that's another spot where, again, not likely to see a shootout. There is an outside scenario on both of those where we could see a shootout, and that's worth thinking about. We've got the 49ers kind of in the same boat, the same basic implied point total, the same opponent point total, but a few more paths to the upside against the Cardinals, in that the Cardinals have a great scheme and have continued to be competitive the last 2 years under Jonathan Gannon when they really didn't have the pieces on defense. They still don't totally have the pieces on defense. You wouldn't look at this defense on paper and say, this is a tough defense, but now you're adding more and more talent. They're getting better and better from a talent perspective, and Jonathan Gannon's scheme remains good. His ability to throw something at an opponent that makes it difficult for them remains good. And so, again, we probably see things in kind of these low 20s. Maybe one of these teams breaks up into the high 20s. But there is this outside shot for this game to shoot out. And then, of course, we have the Cowboys and Bears with two teams implied to score 24 plus points, highest game total of the week. The only game where we have two teams implied to score a lot of points in a close spread type of game. And what I really want to highlight here is this game probably requires Caleb Williams doing well in order for this game to take off. And the reason for that is because the Cowboys are totally content being, we're seeing more and more of this kind of old school football where whether it's the Eagles, whether it's the Lions, whether it's the Packers, these teams that are willing to run the ball as the staple of their offense, but to build downfield passing off of that. So instead of the Saints, where we're letting Rattler drop back to throw the ball a ton, and it's a lot of short area throws, and that's how we're marching the field. It's like we're going to be big up front. We're going to try to physically overpower the defense. We're going to pick up yards on the ground, and then we're going to pick up chunk plays through the air. And the Cowboys seem to be building that style of offense. And heading into the season, we kind of thought that would be Brian Schottenheimer's approach, but it was like, yeah, but how are they going to do that without a rushing attack? Well, Javonte Williams looks a lot better than expected. The Cowboys' rushing attack looks better than expected. And I don't think the Bears are well equipped to stop the rushing attack. So I think the Cowboys, if this game stays close and kind of lower scoring, and so keep in mind that Giants-Cowboys game, I think it was 13-10 partway through the third quarter. So it was a lower scoring game until some big plays started getting hit. And all of a sudden it was back and forth, and all these points started piling up. So you look at the final score in that game, and it can feel like, oh my gosh, well, we know that the Bears defense has not been good. They played well against J.J. McCarthy for 3 quarters, but then you see J.J. McCarthy a week later, and you're like, oh, he might just not be ready. He might just be kind of bad. And then you see the Bears against the Lions, and you realize, oh, okay, the Bears don't have a good defense, and the Cowboys just put up all these points, and all these points were just scored against the Bears. Realize the Cowboys are not coming into this game saying, hey, let's go out there and score 40. They're coming into this game saying, let's control this game, let's run the ball, let's shoot for some chunk plays down the field. And so it won't be surprising if this first quarter ends and the score is 7-3, something like that. And then people are like, oh my gosh, like we thought this was going to be a shootout and it's not. Well, it's going to have to develop throughout the game. So realize that. And how it develops is probably from Caleb Williams doing well, hitting some touchdowns, and forcing the Cowboys to get a little bit more aggressive, and also fixing the posture toward the end of the half, right? Where if the Cowboys get the ball with 2.5 minutes left and the Bears haven't been able to do anything all game and the Cowboys are winning 10-3, yeah, the Cowboys want to go down and score, but also the main thing for them will be, let's not give the Bears another chance and let's just control the clock. If we end up with a field goal, that's fine. We go into the half up 10 points. The Bears haven't been able to get anything going against us, as opposed to a game where maybe it's 17-10 or it's 13-17 and the Bears have been doing well. It doesn't really matter who has the 17 or the 10. It's like, but especially if the Cowboys are behind, but then the Bears have been doing well. And it's like, hey, we got to go score points here. Like points are going to be required to win this game. And that's where you really can start to see things snowball. And then obviously we would need the right run out in the second half. But again, remember, bettors are smart. The in aggregate wisdom of all the bettors coming together to create the line. This is a smart community, right? 50% of the money on either side is going to get this line where it really should be over time. And so about 50% of the time, this game's going to play to the under. So see that scenario of how it plays to the under and then build for the scenario of what would be required for it to go to the over. So again, this game is likely to start a little bit lower scoring, a little bit slower, and then you hope that things ramp up. So there is real downside risk here. But we have a unique week where this game's going to be more popular than it should be. People are going to overrate the chances of it shooting out. But also, if this game doesn't shoot out, more than likely, we play out this slate 100 times, probably more than 50% of the times, if this game doesn't shoot out, we just don't get a shootout on this slate. So it's not like, oh my gosh, you're going to get buried and other games are going to soar past you. Or it's not like, hey, there's this really clear spot over here where we can pivot away from this game and maybe Cowboys, Bears is 50%, 40% likely to turn into a true shootout, 30% likely to turn into a true shootout. But here's this other game that's 20% likely and nobody's on it. Well, we don't really have that this week. So we also want to recognize it's okay to go heavy on this game and then try to win other places, right? And say, hey, if this game doesn't play to the upside, where are some of the other places on our roster where we are looking to win? So those are kind of some of the things I want to think about with this game, which I think is a critical component to think about in this game. And then also, of course, this week we have backup quarterback week. We have Tyrod Taylor at the Bucs. What does this mean for the Jets? What does this mean for Garrett Wilson? I mean, I said it early in the week. that if Justin Fields ended up being out for this game, it was probably better for the Jets offense because you can't run against the Bucs. And what was the problem for the Jets last week is not their offense is as bad as it looked against the Bills. The Bills defense, by the way, doesn't look very good. And I was saying that to Reezy yesterday before our prop spot, before the Dolphins and Bills game. I was like, I don't think this game's going to be the blowout everybody thinks it's going to be. I was hearing really sharp people saying, oh my gosh, you couldn't make this line big enough. And I would still bet the Bills to have the line. Like the Bills are going to smash the Dolphins here. And it was like, I don't think the Bills defense is as good as people think it is, right? The problem with the Jets was they can't win a drop back passing game with Justin Fields. And so as soon as they fell behind in that game and had to go to drop back passing, their game was shot, right? So throwing Tyrod Taylor in here in a spot where you can't run against the Bucs anyway, what actually benefits the Jets, and I think it's a good spot for Garrett Wilson in this game against the Bucs, where it's going to be Tyrod throwing to him instead of Justin Fields. And does that mean that the Jets can keep things close? Probably not. Or, keep it like super competitive and really push the Bucs? Probably not. But it's an interesting spot there. Mariota against the Raiders. I would expect that the Commanders will be more focused on controlling this game in terms of we can hold the Raiders down, and then we want to not make mistakes on offense. So they've been kind of a short area passing attack to start, and I would expect them to continue to be a short area passing attack with Mariota in here this week. So one of the interesting angles here to think about is, what if the Raiders try to break this approach? What if the Raiders then try to say, hey, let's force the Commanders to play from behind. Let's force the Commanders to play in a way that they don't want to play with Marcus Mariota under center. So what we know about Pete Carroll over a very large sample size, Pete Carroll has actually been vocal about this during his time with Seattle, is in his mind, the way that you strategize and play a football game is to try to have the upper hand heading into the fourth quarter or in the fourth quarter, and that you win games in the fourth quarter. But in Pete Carroll's mind, it was always, as long as the game is close heading into the fourth quarter, as long as the game is close in the fourth quarter, we can win most of those games. So it's not in Pete Carroll's strategic approach or in his typical nature to say, hey, let's actually get really aggressive on offense early in this game. Let's try to put the Commanders in a hole, and let's force them to win in the way that they don't necessarily want to with Marcus Mariota. So I think it's pretty unlikely to happen, but there is this outside shot that the game develops that way, or that the Raiders, actually go out of their way to try to create the type of game environment. So that's something we could think about in that one. Mac Jones against the Cardinals. So I think we can treat 49ers pieces pretty much the same with Mac Jones versus Brock Purdy. I don't think that there is a massive drop-off from Brock Purdy to Mac Jones in spite of the massive difference in their salaries. Obviously, Brock Purdy is a better quarterback than Mac Jones. He's proven that. But I don't think that Mac Jones in this system, in this offense, with these weapons is a huge drop-off. So I think that you can treat, assuming Juwan Jennings plays, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall. If, last week I had a bunch of Kendrick Bourne in the Bink machine, and then as soon as Juwan Jennings was active, I switched that, right? I went down to like 2% Kendrick Bourne and up to, I don't know what I had, like 8 or 10% Juwan Jennings to say, okay, now Juwan Jennings is in, he's going to be the one getting the targets here. If Juwan Jennings misses, Kendrick Bourne becomes really interesting, along with Ricky Pearsall, of course. If Juwan Jennings plays, he's interesting here. And I don't think you have to worry too much about the fact that it's Mac Jones. And then we have Browning versus Wentz. So let's talk about both sides. On the Browning side, he's a really competent NFL backup. And I think what's really important here to think about is he understands his limitations. He understands the limitations of the offensive line. So where Burrow tends to have a long time to throw because he's willing to bounce around in the pocket, take big hits in order to make plays. And he's talked about he thinks that that is the best way for the Bengals to win games. He's willing to take these hits. Maybe someone needs to drill in him that doesn't have to be the case, but he's willing to take those big hits in order to help the Bengals win games. And Browning's approach is obviously going to be different. It's going to be, hey, our offensive line isn't great. We've got these great weapons. Let me get the ball out quickly and let them do something with the ball in their hands. So I think it's a poor setup against Minnesota because of all the things that the Minnesota defense can throw at them. But I do think that Browning's going to produce some big games for his pass catchers, and it wouldn't be shocking if this were one of those weeks. And then on the Viking side, I don't know. I cannot confidently say that there's a gap between Sam Darnold and Carson Wentz. Heading into last season, nobody would have said, oh, Sam Darnold is clearly a better quarterback than Carson Wentz. We get him for a year in Kevin O'Connell's system, and he performs like a guy who's able to go out and, get a big payday. And was almost in the MVP conversation to the way that he unraveled down the stretch last year. So Carson Wentz, a former MVP frontrunner. I think people forget his second year in the league. He tore his ACL, I think it was week 13, and he was the betting favorite for the MVP at that point in that season, right? This is a guy who has been a good quarterback. There were a lot of things that happened on his way out the door in Philadelphia where, he's talked about as a poor teammate. Certainly confidence issues that have cropped up in some of his stops since then, but also a guy who's put up, I think it was 26 plus 25.9 or more DraftKings points in 4 of his last 9 starts, 31 plus DraftKings points in 2 of his last 9 starts, starting for his 6th team in 6 years. But I don't think that we could confidently say that Sam Darnold at the start of last year was a better quarterback or we would have had more confidence in Sam Darnold starting for this team at the start of last year than Carson Wentz starting for this team at the start of last year. And so then flip that forward to this year and say, couldn't Carson Wentz play well in this offense? He likes throwing the ball downfield. He likes taking shots. And this offense is as good as any at getting guys open downfield. I've said a couple places this week that honestly, genuinely, when you watch all 16 games, what I'm always watching for is outliers, watching for things that really pop, whether it's the way a team plays or an individual player. One of the things that pops, things that pop positively or negatively, when you watch JJ McCarthy, it genuinely looks like he's playing on 0.75x speed. His processing is so much slower. And I've shouted out a couple things in my journal in Discord of like, go back and watch this play, right? Of how deep Justin Jefferson was, how late after his break on this route, JJ McCarthy threw the ball. And so it's like he's seeing things really slowly. And that's not to say he can't turn things around and become a great quarterback for this offense. But my point is, right now, Carson Wentz is probably a better quarterback in this offense than JJ McCarthy has been the first couple of weeks. And so I do think Carson Wentz is very interesting in this spot. Then we also have a couple of games between good defenses, but competitive potential that could skew to the upside. So I think Texans, Jags, Colts, Titans also falls into that category of competitive, good defenses, but it should be a competitive game that could skew to the upside. So just kind of an overview, I think, of what this slate provides. So in summary, we've got a game that clearly stands out, but also has ways it can disappoint. We have potential for no other game to hit, but also potential for just one game to hit, right? And if you land on that one game and this other game disappoints, you could be way ahead of the field. And then, of course, we'll get to this in the grid, but potentially a small running back pool on my end, and really not so big of a pass catcher pool either this week. So again, if you are an OWS member, I'll have my player pool this evening, Friday evening, in the scroll on oneweekseason.com. You also see this code at the bottom if you're watching this on YouTube. This code BINK1 is $1 access to the Bink Machine Optimizer this week. So again, like last week, I put 150 rosters into play. I had about 20 rosters in single entry 3 max, but I built a couple thousand rosters throughout the week. And I talked about, I've already built a few hundred rosters this week, and my building block on my show with Pete Overzet today was something that I hadn't been thinking of, but it kept showing up in my Bink Machine Optimizer builds. 2 players from the same offense together that kept showing up without their quarterback. And my instinct initially was like, let's not save any of these rosters. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, oh, that's actually pretty sharp, and dug deeper into it. And is that going to be in the bottom-up build? I think it actually is going to be in the bottom-up build. Yeah, so we'll get to that here in just a moment. But yeah, so one of the cool things about using the optimizer, even if you're single entry 3 max, or for me, right? Like I've said, I've got about 6K in play, but 1,300 of that is MME. The bulk of my play is still single entry 3 max, and I'm able to use the Bink Machine to help me see things. Sometimes I'm using rosters directly from the optimizer. Other times, I've had huge weekends where I've seen a roster and been like, this is what I was trying to build. And then it's like, but I want to change these 2 pieces and change those 2 pieces and have a big weekend. And so it can just be so much value in like multiplying your time and multiplying the power of your thinking, your imagination by using the optimizer just to get a feel for different ways rosters can be put together. You might put 1 roster, 3 rosters into play this week, but you can build hundreds of rosters, thousands of rosters, and kind of keep looking through them and seeing what's clicking, seeing what's standing out to you, and find something that you really like. So yeah, BINK1 for access to the Bink Machine. And then if you're a subscriber, you will get my player grid in the scroll where you'll see, again, what I just mentioned, probably a small running back pool and not such a big pass catcher pool this week either for me. Okay, getting to the bottom-up build. So bottom-up build, we're going to build with a 44K salary cap. We have a bottom-up build contest is always linked in the Discord in the BUB channel. It's linked in my player grid at the top of my player grid. It's not paywalled, the link, so you can just go there and enter. You have to be using an OWS pennant in order to win the contest, and you got to build with a salary cap of 44K or less. But it's free to enter. It's really great thought exercise and really fun to compete against everyone. We're doing a $100 prize to first place, or if you prefer, you can have free Inner Circle access for the year if you're not a subscriber, or free Bink machine access for the year if you are a subscriber and you want to use the Bink machine. You can choose one of those instead of the $100 payout. So yeah, just a really cool opportunity to compete against people, to have a cool thought exercise, and yeah, just stretch your brain on something different. 44K salary cap here. So my roster, I'm going to have 43.8K in salary used this week, and 6,200 in salary left over. I started this roster with Carson Wentz and Justin Jefferson. I really think that Jefferson has a shot at putting up one of his 25 to 30 point games, and I don't think people are going to be on him this week. So put those two things together, and he gains a lot of power, especially if we're talking about a contest with 44K in salary cap, where if people are paying up, that's probably not the first place that they are likely to go. The next thing I did on this roster was I put in this building block that is Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson. So on the show with Pete, we ended up going the other option, which was Rashid Shaheed with Juwan Johnson, but Chris Olave plus Juwan Johnson. So you can think of this, it costs 9.2K in salary. Think of this as if there were a wide receiver who costs 9.2K in salary. We've had those before. We've had, high-end Cooper Kupp. We've had Justin Jefferson. We've had CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill in this high 8K, low 9K range. Okay. These two guys, 9.2K in salary. Think about a player, 9.2K in salary, a wide receiver. What would you be looking for? They have averaged 21.5 targets per game between these two guys. 21.5 targets per game. You're not getting that from your 9.2K wide receiver. You're getting 13, 14 targets on a good week. Sometimes 10 targets, every once in a while, 16, 17 targets. They have averaged 27.7 DraftKings points per game between the two of them. Tremendous value at 9.2K. They had a 28-pointer and a 27.3 coiner. Sorry, 9.1K, not 9.2K, so even cheaper. And then little to no ownership, both individually and combinatorially. So really like this block this week. And again, you get those points, you kind of lock them in, and then on a bottom-up build like this, you save some salary as well. Also went Alec Iomanor. You hear it pronounced different ways from different announcers. They'll figure it out eventually, and then I'll stick with whatever I'm hearing the most often. But Iomanor is a big part of this Titans offense. I think he's going to be priced at 5,500 later in the season. He's still 3,700. So easy button to push here where we're trying to save salary on a bottom-up build roster. Wanted to get some access to the Cowboys and Bears game, but I wanted to do it differently than other people would be doing it. So I went DJ Moore instead of Rome Odunze. Rome Odunze is a better play, but it's not as, the gap between these plays is not as broad as the ownership delta is likely to be. So DJ Moore probably makes you a little bit more money over time, even though Rome Odunze is a better play in terms of projections and how often he would hit. Totally fine with both these plays this week, but wanted to throw DJ Moore on here, have a chance to talk about that. Jaguars defense, great pass rush, lots of offensive line issues still on the Texans. So for saving salary at defense, that's a place that I'm happy to go. And then we get over to running backs. Right now, we've got Carson Wentz, Justin Jefferson, Iomanor, Olave and Juwan Johnson block, DJ Moore to get a Bears piece, and then the Jaguars defense. Running back, I really wanted to stay off of Jordan Mason because I know he's going to be popular. But on this particular build, it's fine to throw him in here. I wanted to see if there was a way to get up to one of the high-priced running backs. Obviously, if we had a 50K salary cap, there's a lot that you can do when you start with Carson Wentz, Justin Jefferson, and a Saints block, right? You're saving some salary. And then there's a handful of cheaper wide receivers that you could feel good about, whether it's Dontavian Wicks or Hunter Renfrow or Iomanor or whoever you want to go to down here. Really opens things up on a roster. But with a 44K salary cap, there was no real way to go up to another high-priced player. So I went Jordan Mason here, which playing him alongside Carson Wentz and Justin Jefferson immediately sets this roster apart in the way it's being played. And then threw in Travis Etienne, who I think is just, this Jags rushing attack is really good. It's well schemed. The rhythm of it is well called as far as how Liam Cohen's keeping a defense off balance and all that. And Travis Etienne's a big part of that. So again, another cheap running back that I feel good about this week. And I think that gives us a final roster with 43.2K in salary spent of Carson Wentz, Jordan Mason, Justin Jefferson, this whole block from the Vikings. Travis Etienne as our other running back. The Saints block of Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson. Then Alec Eomenor and DJ Moore rounding out the pass catchers. Jaguars defense rounding out the roster. And with that, I'm going to get out of here. If you are not an OWS member, you can catch more thoughts from me on Pete Overzet's channel. That's already on his channel by the time you're watching this. On Solo Ship with myself and Squirrel Patrol from 4 for 4. That's on the OWS YouTube and podcast feed. All of this is free, so feel free to tap into some of that. And again, week passes on what are week passes? What do they cost? $19 for a week pass on OWS, and Bink machine access only $1 this week. So yeah, hop in and get access to more content, more thoughts, build that sharp player pool, mess around with the Bink machine. You don't need an OWS membership to use the Bink machine. So you can just pay $1 and use the Bink machine this week. You'll have access to projections through the Bink machine, to ownership projections through the Bink machine. So $1, even if you don't use the Bink machine, $1 just to have access to projections and ownership projections. Nice little edge there if you don't have a membership anywhere else where you're getting that stuff. So yeah, with that, I'm going to get out of here. As always, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, listening to me talk for 45 minutes, 50 minutes straight. I will see you on OWS throughout the weekend, and I will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.